You probably don't even remember picking it up. One moment you're sitting at your desk staring at a document or a spreadsheet or just a wall, and the next moment your phone is in your hand and you're scrolling. You didn't decide to do it, it just happened. And when you put the phone back down, you don't feel better. You feel roughly the same, maybe slightly worse, and the work is still there waiting. Most people assume this is a willpower problem. They think they reached for their phone because they were weak, distracted, or undisciplined. But that framing doesn't hold up when you look at what's actually happening inside the brain during those moments. This isn't a character flaw. It's a misunderstanding of what rest actually is, and why the thing we reach for most often isn't providing it. There is a deeply held assumption that a break means stopping, that if you step away from something mentally demanding, whatever replaces it counts as recovery. A walk, a snack, a conversation, a scroll through social media, the logic seems reasonable. You were doing one thing, now you're doing another thing, so your mind must be resting. But this is where the assumption starts to fall apart. The brain doesn't work like a muscle that simply needs to be unused to recover. Different types of mental activity draw on different resources, and some of those resources are the same ones being depleted by stress, task switching, and information overload. The question isn't whether you stopped working. The question is whether what you switch to actually lets those specific systems recover. Research in cognitive psychology suggests there's a meaningful difference between two modes the brain operates in. One is directed attention, which is the effortful focus state used when you're trying to concentrate, make decisions, or suppress distractions. The other is a more diffuse, involuntary mode that activates when the brain isn't being driven toward a goal. This second mode is associated with processing, consolidating, and what researchers sometimes describe as mental restoration. The problem is that most of what we do on our phones belongs firmly in the first category. When you open a social media app, your brain immediately begins evaluating. Is this interesting? Is this relevant to me? Should I respond to this? Should I feel something about this? That's not passive consumption. That's active cognitive work, even if it doesn't feel like it. The directed attention system stays engaged, the decision-making systems stay engaged, and the part of your mind that was already fatigued continues being fatigued. Think about what happens in a typical afternoon at a desk job. You've been in meetings, answering emails, and trying to push through a task that requires actual thinking. By 2 or 3 in the afternoon, something shifts. The words on the screen seem less meaningful. A decision that should be simple feels harder than it should. This is the experience of directed attention, fatigue, and it's a well-documented pattern in how human cognition behaves over a workday. The instinct that follows is completely understandable. You feel drained, so you want something easy, something that doesn't require effort. And scrolling feels effortless. It's frictionless, it's immediately stimulating, and it doesn't ask anything of you in the way that writing a report does. But stimulating and restful are not the same thing. And that gap is exactly where the confusion lives. Each new post, each new image, each notification that pops up while you're scrolling is a small piece of information your brain has to process and categorize. Research on attention suggests that even brief interruptions, even ones we seek out voluntarily, require cognitive resources to reorient from. When you're scrolling, you're not having one experience. You're having dozens of micro-experiences in quick succession, each one pulling a small amount of focus before being replaced by the next. There's also the emotional dimension. Social content isn't neutral. It carries comparisons, social information, mild anxiety triggers, things that are funny or upsetting or confusing. Emotional processing isn't a background task. It uses real cognitive resources, and those resources overlap significantly with the ones you were trying to rest. You're not switching off. You're redirecting the same depleted system toward a different kind of demand. This is what makes the phone check feel so unsatisfying. You reach for it because something in you genuinely needs relief. That need is real. The fatigue is real, but the tool you're using to address it doesn't match the need underneath it. It's a bit like being thirsty and drinking something that keeps your mouth busy without actually hydrating you. The sensation of consumption is there, but the relief isn't. And this plays out in ways that are easy to recognize if you pay attention. You put the phone down and within a few minutes you feel the pull again. Not because you're addicted in any dramatic sense, but because the original need, the need for genuine cognitive rest, was never addressed. So the cycle repeats. Pick up, scroll, put down, feel slightly unsatisfied, pick up again. The uncomfortable part of understanding this isn't guilt. It's more subtle than that. It's the recognition that for many people, The behavior they use most often to manage mental fatigue is the one least equipped to relieve it, not because they made a bad choice, but because nothing about the phone signals that it's demanding. It looks easy, it feels easy, and the costs are invisible until you've already paid them. It's also worth being clear about what this does not mean. This is not an argument that phones are harmful, or that social media is uniquely bad, or that you should replace your phone breaks with meditation, or nature walks, or some other prescribed alternative. Research on attention and cognitive recovery is not simple, and individual differences matter. Some people find certain types of passive scrolling genuinely restful. Some content genuinely does bring a sense of ease or warmth. The brain is not uniform, and generalizations about it are always incomplete. What this is pointing to is something more specific. It's the gap between the feeling of taking a break and the function of one. Those two things often coincide, but they don't always, and understanding why they come apart in this particular case can shift how you interpret your own experience. You're not lazy when you reach for your phone and still feel tired afterward. You're responding to a real signal with a familiar tool that happens not to be calibrated for that signal. The research in this area doesn't tell us exactly what we should do differently. It tells us something more foundational, that the concept of rest is more specific than we tend to treat it. Rest from a particular type of mental demand requires the actual disengagement of the systems doing that work. That's harder to achieve than it sounds in an environment designed to keep those systems active. Most people go through a significant portion of their day in a cycle of effort and ineffective recovery, without ever quite understanding why they still feel drained by evening. Not because they weren't trying to rest, but because the version of rest most available to them doesn't quite reach the part of them that needs it. That's not a moral failure. It's a mismatch between what the brain needs and what the environment makes easiest to reach for. And that mismatch is worth sitting with for a moment, not to change anything, not to feel bad about it, just to understand it a little more clearly than you did before.